Apyayantu mamangani vak pranaschakshu strotramatu valam indriyana cha var sarvani. May my limbs grow vigorous, my speech, breath, eye, ear, as also my strength and all my senses. Sarvam Brahma Panishatam Maham Brahma Nirakuryam Mama Brahma Nirakarot Anirkarna Astu Anirkaranam Me Astu. All is the Brahman of the Upanishads. May never discard Brahman, may that Brahman never discard me. May there be no discarding. May there be no discarding. Tad Atmani Nirate Ya Upanishatsu Dharmasche Te Mani Shantu Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. That those truths set forth in these Upanishads live in me, dedicated to the self. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. So as I mentioned, this is an interactive session. So I can start off with me keeping quiet and you saying something in relation to what did we learn, or what do you think you learned specifically from last week, Saturday?
We were talking about the real agency, Swamiji, mainly. What's the one that's behind everything? The ear behind the ear, the eye behind the eye, the mind behind the mind.
Yes.
And to, kind of constantly be aware of who's the real agent and everything, which is actually the divine force and nothing else. And to be connected with that.
Yes, so this Upanishad is selected because of its directness, its purity, and its brevity. And the very title of the Upanishad is Kena. It's a question, by whom? And you see, if we make any inquiry of any kind, be it all scientific variety, investigating this world, or investigating what is behind it, what is the root of it, then it always begins with a question. So I have one question, and that is, why don't we ask the question? And I can answer it myself by saying that we take for granted all the things around us, not knowing or understanding its superficiality. So the purport of the Upanishads is only three things. It's very simple. There is only one existence. Now that's a simple statement, but it doesn't look like that. That's the problem. It doesn't look like one, it looks like many. It looks like a huge range of multiplicity and diversity. And yet we know it to be true. We have a universe. That's why we call it uni. Only one. You must have heard in modern times this version, we live in a multiverse. That's a hypothesis. Even so, it's still a universe. If there are many, many of these worlds, yeah, that's okay. But that doesn't solve the problem. It only, and there's an expression, kicks the can down the road. That's all it does. So we take for granted that there is a singular existence, even though it doesn't look like it. And that means that we have to find some explanation for why it looks as it looks. Now, what we're trying to investigate is something which is very subtle. If it had some moving parts, we would register it in the context of change, in the context of dividedness. So motion and dividedness, why is it that something that is undivided, something that is unchanging, can appear as something that is changing and divided? And so the third principle of the Vedanta is that what we all have, normally in philosophy, we wave our hands and say this, all of this, where does it come from? Well, all of this is called mithya. It looks like something that is not really there. But how is it that it feels so real to us? And what will we do about it? Well, this is the thing. Swami Vivekananda made a remarkable statement about the universe. He says, what we see as this world, as this universe, is nothing more than that single entity, single existence that we call Brahman, as seen through space and time and causation. Very profound statement. If it wasn't for space, we wouldn't see the dividedness. And if it wasn't for time, we wouldn't see the change. And if it wasn't for causation, we'd have no motivation to do anything. We'd be fatalists. So there's a very good reason why these components of our apparition are in place. Now, to understand this properly, we have to ask this question. If all these objects that are contained within the world don't have any agency of their own, if there's only one existence, then what is the thing that moves? What is the thing that witnesses? What is that thing which is the knower behind all the things that are known? And all of that inquiry is contained in this one question. Kinishitam patiti prayashitam. By whom is all these things? Is the mind directed? Does the mind alight on different subjects? Well, just to refresh what we studied, the attention is like a kind of bee collecting pollen from many different flowers. And it is very restless. It goes to one, then it goes to another. And you'll see some insects, a fly, for example, has no discrimination like that. It'll settle equally on a flower as well as a compost heap. It doesn't really mind. There's no discrimination in it. Is the mind something like that? If we take away all the discriminating faculty that we have, that is the will, the voluntary direction of the attention, then the mind goes in all directions, directed by our misunderstanding. This world will give us some satisfaction. This world is where the answers are. And this is a world where the objects of it attract the consciousness that is within us and goes out through the senses. Katha Upanishad says, you see, that all this consciousness is directed outward through the eyes, through the ears, like windows. But if that consciousness is our pure birthright, more than just existence, but the evidence of this being consciousness itself is consciousness in all beings. There's a very interesting piece of information that I picked up maybe 2-3 weeks ago. There is a bird called the very bird. I think you'll find it in North America. And it's a very small bird. And the thing that was unknown about it, I think it is to be found in Delaware in North America. What was unknown about it is, where does it go? It suddenly disappears at a certain season, around about June or so, and around about this time of the year, and it goes and it migrates, but we don't know where it migrates to. So with great cunning and great technology, they managed to catch some of these birds. They put microchips on, some monitoring devices on, and sent them on their way, and they were able to track these birds. They were migrating from the very north of the United States of America all the way to Brazil. What a huge, huge journey. Why would they go to Brazil? Was the next question. They tried to figure this out. Why would you go to Brazil? Of course, humans in North America and Delaware will know why they go to Brazil. They go to Brazil for the weather, for a holiday. But clearly these birds are not in a holiday mood. Nobody ever saw their suitcases that they packed. They came up with all kinds of theories. And then all of a sudden it struck one researcher. Just a wild idea, since we have no other ideas. In their travel to South America, they have to go through a whole network of hurricanes that sometimes are there and sometimes are not. And sometimes it's hurricane season and sometimes not. What they discovered was the birds are not migrating exactly at the same time. At certain times, they withhold their migration. And they started studying the patterns of the hurricanes and studying the patterns of the birds' migratory habits. And they realized that the birds do not migrate early if there's a hurricane. But the hurricane is right there on the Pacific, in the Pacific Ocean. How do they know? So this is a great question mark. But the Vedanta philosophy says that behind it, all of this is a knower. And the knower always knows. There is pure consciousness sitting there behind it, behind everything, behind a bird, behind a flower, behind the winds, even behind the hurricanes, behind the rotation of the earth, behind the fact that it is at a certain distance and angled to create seasons around the sun. It is, has polarity in such a way that the harmful cosmic rays of the sun are screened out. A kind of magnetic field around the earth so that there's a magnetic north, a magnetic south. And all of this, and this question investigates the agency of the whole world. If you didn't ask the question, you just accept it. This world as it is, let us eat, let us drink, let us be merry. And sad also, because this eating, drinking, and marrying also produces indigestion, disease, old age, difficulties, pain. And then when we use our energy in combat zone to others, it also creates some pain because we took other people, places, and objects seriously. And we had no other formula to use, apparently. These Upanishads, therefore, they're not just philosophy. And this particular Kena Upanishad is divided into two sections, and you can clearly see what these sections are. So the answer to this original question is in two parts. One part says, there is this one existence called Brahman. But the second part, and you can distinguish the two parts by the way it's written. Because the first part, to do with that subject, is written in poetry. It's written in a meter. And so metrical verse is used. The second part goes into prose, distinguishing the two subjects. The second part is to do with a personal God, this Brahman, involved in the world as a personal entity. So why on earth would there be these two sections? It is to arrange a completeness of the subject and to arrange the idea that this impersonal existence, this impersonal consciousness and root behind all things, that is so subtle, it's impenetrable. It has no business with space, no business with time. It only looks like that. Can be accessed directly by those people who are prepared to withdraw the mind. They withdraw their thoughts from all the worldly objects in front of them. They can stop this consciousness from going outside by redirecting it inside and concentrating on the ultimate fact of the universe that they can do. But for the vast majority of people, they'll need some other way. They'll need a progressive pathway up the mountain, so to speak. They'll have to acknowledge the world, and they'll have to acknowledge what is called Ishvara, the Lord. That was also mentioned in the previous Upanishad we studied, the Isha Upanishad. It was entirely to do with that personal entity. Don't forget the opening statement, Isha Vasham Idam Sarvam. That Lord lords it over all beings. And so the knowledge of Ishvara, this entity that has a governing aspect of it, seemingly, is a lower kind of knowledge, no doubt, aparavidya, but it is the pathway that leads to deliverance eventually from what we might call krama. It gives a sense of krama mukti, deliverance from all the actions that bind us. And so the worshipping soul, this Upanishad will acknowledge, gradually acquires the higher wisdom, the paravidya, and that results, of course, in the consciousness of the identity with the Supreme, which is our aim. So this is a profound Upanishad because it gives us two sides of the same coin. But it is based on this understanding from the very start that there is something that wills the mind or directs the mind when it alights on a subject. And there is some entity that commands the breath or the first movement of energy that we experience. When a child is born, that first breath comes as a cry. And there's a good reason for it. The child was nice and happy in the womb, nice, warm, cozy place, all buffered by fluidity, and very only faint noises from the outside, echoes. And it's nice and dark and warm and comfortable there. Only thing is heard is the sound of the mother's heartbeat and the rushing flow of blood going around the mother's circulatory system. And then it comes out into bright light, loud noise, unfamiliar territory. And it also had to squeeze through a very narrow canal. And then finally, it realizes I have to take a breath here. All unusual, unfamiliar territory. And it doesn't stop there. Because from the moment that child is born, it starts learning about its environment, a new world. And so that by the age of, let's say, even 2 years of age, the child has learned, or more accurately acquired, a complete language. You ask somebody, you're learning a language, how long will it take? And I asked this question to somebody. They said, oh, I learned a language. Yeah, it probably took me about 5 years. Well, how did you do it? Well, I had to study grammar and syntax and sentence construction. And then the words, the vocabulary I had to acquire, and I had to get used to new sounds. I had to get used to new pronunciations. All right, that's not how a child learns. A child learns just by watching, listening, watching your mouth, listening to the sounds, identifying the sounds with objects. A child doesn't study grammar for 2 years. It just acquires this. So this acquisition capacity that we all have, absorbing all this information, is for a certain direction, and it's taken for granted that something is willing it from inside. Something is moving it from inside. So when we talk about inspiration, there is no inspiration that comes from the outside. It is all coming from the inside. Unfoldment is from the inside. Growth is from the inside. So it's a legitimate question to ask. And the question makes no sense if the answer is no. I don't know. I don't know who directs the mind in this way. I don't know who watches it. But clearly, it is not the eye, it's not the eyeball, it's not the mind. I can watch the mind. It is the witness, the energetic entity that stands behind all of this. And yet, in seeming paradox, doesn't move anywhere, doesn't possess anything, is not an object of our scrutiny, and therefore very, very difficult to pin down. Now, religion tries its best because this Ishvara, the second part of it, it puts within the context of what can we imagine. And the highest ideal that we have as humans is a human ideal. We take great heroes and heroines, we put them on pedestals. We admire them for their various qualities. And so, if there is a God, that God must be something like that, but much better, must be absolutely perfect. And the most perfect thing we know has hands and legs and feet and so on. No physical or mental defects whatsoever. And our human experience falls short of that. Because no matter what ideal you paint, there's always some defect in it. We always are pretty good at finding the defects, finding the cracks in somebody's personality, finding the various defects. They say that physical attraction is based on symmetry. And yet, perfect symmetry is not found anywhere. So we have the nearest best we can get to. And if it wasn't for this asymmetry, we wouldn't have a universe at all. That's why this universe is just a semblance of what is, an appearance of what is. So I've mentioned the first principle of Vedanta. I've mentioned the third principle of Vedanta. But the second one is this. And this is what this Upanishad is referring to. It's not going outside the person. It's going right to the heart. Who am I? And saying, you see, I am that which sits behind the mind, sits behind the I. And because of that, and we go into this is in reference to the second stanza here. In contrast to that, we can give up wrong notions about self-sufficiency. I'll do this, I'll do that. And departing from that world, we can become immortal, as it were, because that's already our nature. The body is entirely mortal. Our thoughts and mind entirely finite and ending. Never mind about the totality of it. One thought is enough. One thought comes, one thought goes, it's finished with. And if it wasn't for this component that we call time, then we wouldn't understand or notice any change. It is very convenient, therefore, that this mind is directed according to time, that this breath is directed according to time, and that there is space to occupy, and we can see this dividedness as our clue, that when you put in space, the undivided looks to be divided. So we dealt with the first stanza, just to remind you. We dealt with the second stanza also. The first stanza was asking this question, profound question. What is the thing? Taking for granted there must be something. When you observe something changing, there must be some changeless witness that understands it, sees it. And if there is a changing thing, and there's only one without a second, it must be responsible for the change as well, or at least the appearance of the change. And so because that eye is behind the eye, and the ear is behind the ear, and the mind is behind the mind, and speech is behind speech, it gives us a different perspective. That there's an eternal reality behind the mind, the life, the senses, the mind of the mind, the life of the life. And this alone is a beautiful, beautiful stanza for meditation. When people come in an agitated state, and I may have mentioned this before, I have a few tricks up my sleeve. One thing I tell them is, please sit here, now I'll go to the door and walk back and sit on the chair. They do that. I say, what happened? I say, I went to the door as you instructed. I came, I walked, I sat on the chair. Okay. Now do the same, but this time, detach yourself completely and say, whatever your name is, Fred. Fred is walking from the door. His arms are swinging. His legs are moving. His heart is pumping. And then he sits on a chair. Then I ask, where's your agitation, state of agitation? Normally I rate it 1 to 10. 10, you're most peaceful. Where are you? Oh, somehow 9, 9.5. Good enough. What was the difference? When you walked in identified as a person, swinging your arms and legs and sitting, occupying the mind with all kinds of events from the past or anxiety about the future, a state of agitation. What happened here? Now, in the Srimad Bhagavad Gita, Krishna does the same thing. Because Arjuna is completely agitated, in a state of nervous breakdown, with all the symptoms clear, not being able to hold something even, shaking, tears running down, unstable. And why is that? Krishna soon sees it. And he says, you have identified yourself with the wrong person, the wrong entity. Go to your causal entity. And he brings out this word Atma. And he maintains it by a number of different multiple endorsements, multiple duplications, multiple different approaches, and clearly says there, along with the Kati Upanishad. You think that you're affecting something on the outside, you're not. You think that you're affected by the outside, you're not. You cannot kill and you cannot be killed. The question, where do I go after this life, is not a sensible question. Not from this point of view. And so the second point in the Vedanta is this, that this entity within you, that is the eye of the eye, the ear of the ear, the mind of the mind, the speech of the speech, the breath of the breath, and everything else you can think of, that real entity doesn't come and doesn't go, and therefore is identified and identical with this existence called Brahman. As soon as you know that, then you are free. But knowledge comes gradually. We have to overcome the apparitional aspect that we see. As I say, we can do it directly, difficult for most, or we can do it indirectly. And then, of course, we have to say and make very, very sure in this third stanza of this Upanishad. You see, the eye goes and sees something. Now, we don't think in a scientific way when we see something. When we see something, we're assuming I am looking at something. But science doesn't see it in this way. Science says that everything you see is in the past. And when light comes into the retina, even the light from the sun is 8.5 minutes away. When the light comes into the retina, modern science at the moment tells us you're not seeing an object, you're seeing something like a photograph of it, which hits the retina and hits the back. And all the color cones are sitting there, and a reverse image is being taken. And the brain puts it back the other way. And what we're actually seeing on the outside is not really what it is, it's all in the mind. So says modern science, whether you believe it or not. That's the scientific perspective, not at all as we view it. So even at that level, we're going to raise a question. What is our reality about what we see or what we hear? And then, of course, if I lose both hearing in both ears, does it mean that the sound does not exist? The old philosophical question, a tree falls in a forest. If there's nobody to hear it, does it fall? Well, I don't know. Nobody's there to know it. Nobody's there to see it. Nobody's there to hear it. But clearly, it is not the external organs that do the hearing or the seeing. Some further component is there. Attention has to be there. And all these senses have their replay in the mental field when we dream. When we dream, there's only one dreamer. But you see, in the waking state also, there's only one dreamer. And so if we understand this fully, we won't take life so seriously. Practical implications there. It is not the eyeball that sees. The eyeball is just the same matter that went in to make it. Yesterday's bananas and milk, that's all. Yesterday's material went in to make the molecular body. There's a molecular body that without some infusion of life is just matter ready for a compost heap. Finished. Just organic, just chemicals put together in molecular structures with some atomic activity behind it. And that aspect of it just gets transformed. It doesn't come, it doesn't go. It remains, but it changes. But there's one thing that never changes, that witnesses all along. And so, na tatra chakshur gachanti na vak, gachanti na mahana. The eye doesn't go there. Speech doesn't go there. The mind doesn't go there. We don't know that entity that we're calling Brahman, that support of everything, because the previous stanza told us that this is that Brahman. He told us, literally, that since he is the eye, or the ear, the mind of the mind, the speech of the speech, the life of the life, and the eye of the eye, therefore, the intelligent person, but who is this he? And there is only that one which has to be the existent one. So what is that? So we do not know him. And we see that the translator has here in the third stanza put Brahman to be such and such. They point a finger and say, oh, that is such and such. No, that's him, that's his name. That's the characteristics, that's the color, etc. But we can't do this because no more than when you see your own image in a mirror, you cannot see the totality of you, only the reflection. And you can see bits and pieces. And you make an assumption, it has to be me. But you're only seeing an image, you're only seeing a reflection. It is not you in totality. The seer, therefore, can never be seen. The knower can never be known. The witness can never be witnessed. But what is that? It is only the one that sees, the one behind it. That's the one. The one that, when you poise yourself in that position, gives you a 9.5 out of 10 piece. But you can't sustain it for long because the external world then crowds in again, and along with that, the memories of, oh, he did this, he did that, this was how it was, the things that are giving stress. But we're not aware of any process about instructing this. We can't teach it, says this stanza. Na vidmo na vijanimo tataita anushishyati. We cannot know it. We know not. We understand not. But how can you teach something you don't know? That's the difficulty. The Supreme is not dependent on the mind, the life, and the senses for its being. Other things are dependent. So with no dependency, it's not an object. The knowledge of a thing arises only through the senses or the mind. But since Brahman is not reached by any of these, either the senses or the queen of the senses called the mind, then we don't know what its nature is. We shouldn't try to define it. So we're therefore unable to understand how anyone can explain that Brahman to a disciple. We're left speechless. We can only indicate, please go this way, please go that way. That is why when the Buddha, the Gautama Siddhartha, the silent one of the Shakya clan, was asked, Sir, is there a God or is no God? That great Shakya Muni, silent one of the Shakya clan, remained silent on the matter. How can I tell you what is there? And it's the same with anything else, isn't it? The very frequent question asked is, when will I know when I get my destination? Or what will it feel like? See, you can't say. You go there and find it out. You've never been to New York. You have no idea what the traffic is like. You can see movies of it. You can see pictures of it. I remember seeing some time ago, I think it was something like a meditation video or something like that. In Japan, Japanese people sitting in a Zen kind of hall, something like the hall we're sitting in now, just on a bare minimum. The beauty of Zen is its simplicity, but in front is massive, massive screen covering the whole wall. And they were playing a video on a loop of a beautiful, beautiful waterfall scene with heightened colors. They were all looking at this, a kind of meditation like that. Is that the equivalent of going out in the forest and seeing and feeling and touching the waterfall? No, we can imagine it, of course. The clue is there. As the water is falling, you can smell it. You can feel the spray on your skin. in Delhi, in our center there in Delhi, there's a wonderful interactive exhibition of Swami Vivekananda. And there's one place that you can go to that simulates a kind of technological capsule. It simulates you swimming across from the southern tip of India, Kanyakumari, to the rock where Vivekananda was. And going through the waves and so on, and you hear there's a splash that comes from this side and that side. It's very well done. You feel you're there. Yes. The problem is when you get out, you realize, oh, it's all a technological game. Nothing really happened here. So like that, you see, there's no substitute for actual reality. Reality in this case is defined as the thing that never changes. The thing that has impermanence to it. The thing that has no dividedness in it, has no conditioning within it. And so the next stanza will tell us, Anyad eva tad viditat ato avidat adi iti shushtum polvesham yenas tad yacha kapshiri. So, what are we being told? That, whenever we say that, by the way, we mean only one thing. We mean Brahman. So when it says tad or tat, we mean Brahman, that pure existence. When we say this, it means this world, the outside. When we say tat, we mean that one existence. So that Brahman is surely different from the known, and again, it is above the unknown. And then just so you think it doesn't come from this sage. This is what we have been told by those who saw it, those who understood it directly. We heard of the ancient teachers who explained it to us. So there's a wonderful, vast commentary here, breaking down in great detail what this is. But the idea that the self is Brahman, having been established through this particular sentence, that is surely different from the known, and again, that it is above the unknown. You, the hearer, have absolutely no doubt about this. How can the self be Brahman? But when we say the self, we're not talking the psychophysical self. That's the object. That's the thing that is being witnessed. So that is surely different. For the self is familiarly known to be that which is entitled to undertake all these activities. When you say I'm meditating, we register it to a me that is purely molecular. So when we do rites and meditation, and which being subject to birth and death, seeks to attain either the realms of the immortals, the heavens, and so on and so forth, the holiday camp that is promised by the causal law. Whatever we do has an effect, not only here, but also hereafter. Seeks to attain either the gods headed by Brahma, the creator, that is the cosmic mind, or heaven through the performance of rites or meditation. And if you get to that point of that cosmic mind, that Isha, then you go on from there to this further entity. There's a point of no return. Or you can come back and bring others with you. But if you don't get to that level also, then ultimately you have to return. It is only through the human equipment, body-mind combination, that we can investigate, that we can apply the laws of causation, and that we can establish our own freedom. Therefore, some adorable being other than that self. And the commentator gives an example, for example, Vishnu, Ishvara, Indra, or Prana, that is the vital force of the cosmic mind, the Hiranyagarbha, may well be Brahman, but not to the self, for this is opposed to common sense. Just as other logicians say that the self is different from the Lord, so also those who perform religious rites and rituals worship other deities, the supply agencies, saying sacrifice to that one, sacrifice to that one. Therefore, it is reasonable that that should be Brahman, which is known and adorable. And the worshipper should be one who is different from this. And having noticed this duality and noticed this doubt, either from the looks of the words of the disciple, the next stanza comes in answer to it. And the teacher said, don't be in any doubt. So what is that statement that will remove any doubt? Yad vacha nabhyuditam yena vak abhyudyate tad eva brahma tvam vidhi nedam yad idam upasati. That which is not expressed through speech, but that by which speech is expressed. You can't get clearer than that. That truly, no, that is Brahman. Now, not what people adore here. It is not that. It is not the supply agent. It is not the object that you bring out from time to time to solve a problem. What we call God, by any other name and in any religion, if there is a motive behind it, that is not it at all. If we feel that in any way or sense it to be an object, an extra cosmic creator being, that is not it. And people are worshipping that, no doubt. And that's fine. They'll get the result from it. But that is not the reality. That is not the truth. That is mentioned very specifically. So I repeat that. That which is not expressed through speech, but that by which the speech is expressed, if you think on that, that's a huge meditation by itself. When a sound is made through the vocal cords, don't register it to yourself. Something is enabling the speech. What is that? That is that Brahman. So know that thou is Brahman, not what people adore. Now, we have to make a commentary on that a little bit because Shankaracharya argues that the person, whoever the stanza is coming from, is laying stress on the distinction between the absolute Brahman, who is the one with the deepest self in us, and Ishvara, the God that we are adoring as an objective thing. But you see, when you internalize that Ishvara, it becomes the same as Brahman. That's his point. And so Ishvara is as the indwelling spirit and not as an object who's external to us. That is what the reality is. Now, children who understand this from family teachings, and they go to schools here in Ireland, and sooner or later they come into disagreement. Because even at a young age, the children are asking, where is God? And people who understand the internal aspect of this have been taught, I've taught them, to take their finger, invert it and point inward. It's here. And they come and they say, well, my friend disagrees. My friend says it's there, pointing upwards. But you see, the child will get hooked up on that. So along with this understanding, there should also be, is God everywhere? Now every religion will teach that. God is everywhere. So we're both up there and in here, both. But it's the internal aspect of everything. That's the point. Not the external entity that we worship or that we adore, something external to us. That's not what is meant. So this inward experience of God is felt only by advanced people who have this subjective understanding. That is why there's a qualification to study these Upanishads. That if you close your ears off and say, no, my church says this, my religion says that, here's the doctrine, here's the dogma, this is what this text says, this is what that text says. And try to squeeze this reality within the covers of a book, that will not be what real religion is or real spirituality is. The search is not like that. So the simple, the unreflective child mind seeks God who is above and not within. And there's a great prayer of Solomon from the biblical Old Testament. Hear thou in heaven thy dwelling place. Again, something away. But you see, if you even take the Christian prayer, that is a fundamental prayer of Christians because it was Jesus' prayer, we can understand even there the misunderstanding of the external and the better understanding of the internal. We can rephrase it. First of all, a relationship is set up, not a remote relationship. And we can revise it a little bit, gender-wise. The Jewish tradition is a patronistic one, or patriarchal one, I should say. So our father belongs to us, and mother, who art, point here, in heaven, within. Kingdom of heaven is within, says Jesus. And so on. And then if you want to understand the real practical meaning and effectiveness of japa, you say, hallowed be your name. Your very name is sacred. And the very sound of your name is sacred. So the pure Godhead, which is beyond all conceptual determinations and differentiations, when it's viewed conceptually and concretely, we come to a conclusion that the Christian mystic Meister Eckhart had in distinguishing two things, the God and the Godhead. That which is viewed conceptually and concretely is really an idol, says Meister Eckhart. Had I a God whom I could understand, I would no longer hold him for God, says Meister Eckhart. What a wonderful mystical statement. If I were able to understand that, it would not be a God. Now, unfortunately or fortunately, I encounter some materialist atheists. Because if somebody says in this day and age, particularly at the university level, and start going there, there's a great dichotomy seemingly between religion and science, only because religion never came up to the level of science, and science never came down to the level of religion, and there had to be this mutual understanding. There was a famous statement by Einstein that tells us this, that there has to be, without the two things need each other, but there's no dichotomy in the Eastern system. It's purely an Occidental argument. And one of the immature arguments that comes out is, since there is no evidence for God, we can't believe it. Not understanding that any evidence for God in an objective way would not be evidence at all. It would be something objective. If you can understand it objectively, it's not a reality. It's just another component of the world. So this is a kind of childlike argument from those who never ask these deeper questions. The spirit can never be objectified. And the revelation of spirit is in the depths of one's own life, not in the objective world, actually. However high our conception might be, we always have to get closer to its subtlety and get underneath it. And that we can only do with a spiritual life, a determined and strong spiritual life based on these principles. So when the soul beholds God, says Meister Eckhart, sticking with him, when the soul beholds God purely, he says, it takes all its being and its life and whatever it is from the depths of God. Yet it knows no knowing, no loving or anything else whatsoever. It rests utterly and completely within the being of God and knows nothing but only to be with God. So soon as it becomes conscious that it sees and loves and knows God, that is in itself a departure. A wonderful statement that has come from this great mystic. It comes from a chapter in his works on kings. And the section, it's the 8th section. So we can see as if we never knew it now, again, so important is this, that yat chakshusha na pashyati yena chakshumsi pashyati, that which is not seen by the eye, but which the eyes are, but that by which the eyes are seen, that truly know thou is Brahman. And again, not what people adore or worship. That which is not heard by the ear, but by which the ears are heard or hear, that truly know that is Brahman, not what people here adore. And any time we find this repetition in the Upanishads, we have to acknowledge this person is trying to tell us the same thing over and over again, just to get it into the thick skull. That which is not breathed by life, but by which life breathes, that truly, know that is Brahman, and not what people adore objectively here. You wonderful, wonderful statements. That takes us really to that is the first section of this Kena Upanishad complete. And the second section will deal with a very important subject, the paradox really of the inscrutability of Brahman. If you think that you have understood it, by now you know the answer, of course. If you think you have understood this Brahman, then you just have not. And when you read these passages, you see a great echo from modern science of quantum mechanics. If you think you understand quantum mechanics, you haven't understood. This is the language of modern science. If you think you know what's going on, you have no idea. And the same thing, so the subtlety of it is there. So, okay, next week what we'll do, we'll carry on then. We'll pick up straight away this second section, which is entirely to do with this paradox of the inscrutability of Brahman, so that we truly understand this. And so I see the time is advanced now, so we'll leave the floor open, as it were, for questions, comments, etc.
Could you repeat the what you said about Brahman and Ishvara? There was.
Okay, so we have to understand that Brahman is unknown and unknowable by normal objective means. You understand that much, yes?
Yeah.
Okay. Ishvara, on the other hand, can be the subject of experience because Ishvara is a lower kind of knowledge. Now, if you want Swami Vivekananda's definition of what is God or Ishvara, that is the highest reading of the absolute to the human mind. And for that reason, it's easier to pursue. So in the second part of this Kena Upanishad, when we come to the prose section, it picks up the subject of Ishvara. So two paths are there for us. You can imagine it like the top of a mountain indicating the height of perfection. Well, if you like, you can take a helicopter and go there directly. But that requires something special. It requires withdrawing all your energetic efforts and all your interpretations about the external world. You need to block that off immediately and withdraw immediately into that area of supreme perfection. So that is difficult for some. For most, it means you have to be somebody of subtle intellect, keen understanding, but it is possible. For example, you know yourself, because the questioner knows is familiar, the Ramana Maharshi, he was able to do that. And many people will say, oh, we follow Ramana Maharshi because we follow this Advaita philosophy, this non-dualism. And that's all nice. That's all dressed up in lace because you didn't understand. If you want to realize what he realized, you have to do the same. please go up to a mountain, divested of all material comforts. Withdraw yourself completely from the world. Take away the senses, take away the eyes, the ears, and everything. With the single questioning thing that the Kena Upanishad also are asking, who am I, who am I? That's what the Kena Upanishad is indicating. It's giving you that option. But it's also giving you the principle of it. And based on that principle, we can then do practice. What practice shall we do? Will we also do that? Or will we look for the manifested aspect of that? The addition of time and space is a bit like, you see, having a lamp. There's a light inside, a light bulb is there shining. And our misunderstanding is the lampshade is shining. Today in the bathroom, the light flickered and went off. I had to find a bulb and replace it. To do that, I had to take a cover off, unscrew a cover off. Now, question. If you didn't know anything about it, you would swear that the lampshade is the one that is providing the light. A child might understand it in that way, isn't it? And my misunderstanding is we are seeing all these virtual lampshades, molecular lampshades walking around and thinking that they are self-sufficient. They're self-lighting, self-luminous. They're not. And then the question happens on the death, where are the lights? Where did the lights have go? The lights have been extinguished. Where will they reemerge? The natural question, if you interpret the life as the only thing that's there. But when you take away the lampshade, the actual light bulb shining is there. This is an analogy for what we mean. So we have to change our thinking in this way gradually. Now we can, of course, immediately sit where the light bulb sits, still using the analogy, and beam from there, that's fine. But we have to then withdraw the whole mind. We have to discard any coverings. And so here's the opportunity for most people. Now extend the example to not just one lampshade, but multiple coverings. This is follow the Taittiriya's method. Taittiriya Upanishad will mention Panchakosha, 5 sheaths, 5 coverings. You take these 5 coverings off one by one, one by one, one by one. We can group them into 3. The gross body, molecular body made from molecules. Then there's a subtle body, which is mind. And then there's a causal body. And you go further, and there it is. But because of this mistaken identity, being misled, as it were, by space and time and all of that, and whatever the senses are reporting, how do we get out of that? For most people, and for these Upanishads, you take the self-forgetting soul by the hand and don't deny anything. So let us now see, is there something beyond the physical, beyond the body? Something beyond that, something beyond that, something beyond that. Let's make a progressive internal inquiry about it and see what happens. And at the last moment, what is our experience of this absolute called Brahman? We find a small covering, a small filter, that's all. A tiny screen, something like a small glass. We see the light, but we can't exactly reach it because this glass is there. And the whole thing, the light behind the glass itself, is what we call Ishvara. When we take off that glass, then we find Brahman. There's no distinction between the two. It's only that Brahman plus a small thin layer of understanding is called Ishvara. And that Ishvara doesn't mistake anything, because that Ishvara is Brahman. It's the same thing. But as seen by us. See? that final layer is there that we call God. May as well just call it God. But it's not the extra cosmic creator God. That's the thing. So in various discussions that we have, so, are you a theist? Is a question I often get asked by those who have no understanding of my positions. Now I have to say that I'm an atheist with regards to an extra cosmic creator God. It's not this one that we adore. See, that's what the Upanishad is saying.
Mm-hmm.
So with regard to an extra cosmic creator God, sitting there in the heavens, looking over us, creating the world in 7 days and leaving it, interfering from time to time. No, I don't believe in that. But is it a useful image to have for a child? Oh, yes. Should we go on beyond that? Yes, we should. So we're not denying anything. We're not going from error to truth. We're going from truth to higher truth. Swami Vivekananda's language. That makes us universal. We're not disagreeing with anybody. We're saying, as far as it goes, it looks like that. See the language. It looks like that as far as it goes. Now go a little further. Our great example, of course, in the Vedanta philosophy would be these three examples, the snake and the rope. Most people are familiar with that. And the man with the hat, which is a tree stump at a distance, and so on. So let us go with that. Let us see now. So what did we misunderstand about it? There must have been something that looked like a snake. The snake, if you're not careful, can bite you, can sting you. So a snake is quite an appropriate representation, I suppose, of this world, that if we're not careful, if we take the illusion seriously, it will bite us. So we start off with analysis of the world. We don't deny anything. But an extra cosmic creator God we won't accept. What about some entity that is within us? What about some entity that is closer than breathing? What about the personal God that presents itself for our worship? What about a Jesus? What about a Buddha, a Krishna, a Rama, a Ramakrishna? What about God in the aspect of the Divine Mother? All of these aspects, not only do we not deny, but we affirm them 100% to be true. A reality as far as the relative world is concerned. But when you come to scrutinize that through meditation properly, then that Ishta Devata of yours that represents this Ishwara, this conditioned as it were Brahman, that merges into the unconditioned, the imperishable. The same Brahman is found as Ramana Maharshi found. All right, good. And that God has no illusion about it. It is we who are mistaken. But that Supreme Spirit, that is in the form of the omnipresent, the omniscient, the omnipotent, is never bound, is always free. It is now using these limiting adjuncts, as we call them, these upadhis. And the one upadhi that it is using, that Brahman is using, is Maya, the capacity to put an appearance on, comprised of space, time, causation. Condensed into two things, name and form. All right.
Thank you, Swami.
We'll leave it there then. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.